Hello and welcome to a very interesting conversation in the Home Cheffies Bootcamp series. So, Home Cheffies, as you know, is an award program for home chefs, which I think is one of the most exciting categories, if not the most exciting categories of food in this year, 2021. And we've got like a very interesting mix of judges in the jury who are all like experts in building international level brands in their own field, food and otherwise. Though we have today someone who has a fair bit of expertise in food, and more interestingly, loves food, which is very important criteria. So we're going to tap on her experience to see what we can learn from. So without much ado, let me introduce Prabha Narasimhan. Prabha is an executive director with Unilever, and Unilever, which I remember right from her MBA days, was globally considered to be like the university of marketing and branding among companies. So we have a lot of, and Prabha's actually worked in the F&B sector quite a bit in tea. My understanding is that, and loves food. So welcome on board, Prabha. Thanks so much for being part of our jury.
Thanks, Kalyan. It's really nice to be here. Such a fun way to spend an afternoon.
Yes, in fact, that's something which I want to start with. You were saying that you've actually enjoyed this process of going through the entries and stuff like that. So why don't you tell us a bit about that? What's your take on home chefs, and why do you find this so interesting?
So I think, firstly, when you suggested that I do this, I must confess I was very surprised. I've never ever done anything like this before. But given that you must try everything at least once, I said sounds fun. I like food. This sounds like a really good opportunity, and so all in. So to say, having seen the entries though over the last couple of weeks, I must say that I'm truly impressed by a
Wow.
couple of things. One, by the range of things that people are thinking about and doing, and particularly in these kind of times where everything is constrained, to have this kind of vision at this kind of time, I think speaks volumes for the home chefs who have taken part in this. And this was really across the board. The second thing I found really interesting is a lot of people had commented in their bio that they were planning to do various other things till the pandemic struck. They were going to go to jobs, they were going to do alternate careers, they were planning things to happen in a certain way. And of course the pandemic has changed many of those plans, but almost everybody seems to have converted what was adversity into opportunity, and I loved that idea. And then the third thing, of course, is it just comes back to the fact that it's just such fun to look at food and food pictures and menus and think about, oh, that sounds interesting, let me try that. And this is some, I've bookmarked a couple of those saying must order, must try. So,
Yes, in fact, right now, home chefs who are in Chennai straight away start sending menus to Prabha because that's she's there, and we're always looking at trying out interesting food. But it's been really fascinating, isn't it? And stepping out of one's world because when I normally look at things which happen in food, it's normally among say chefs, writers, restaurants, whoever critics who know that beat very well. But when you get people from outside, it's a completely different perspective. And for someone like you, like you're working day in and day out in FMCGs and with these really big battles happening over there, and big marketing campaigns and huge distributions and all of that, and which sometimes is a bit faceless because it's company versus company, brand versus brand versus this angle. So it must be pretty interesting. But is there any synergy? Because you've worked for so many years and handled so many big brands, and you've been a part of the conceptualization of so many of them, and now you're seeing the sort of thought process which is going into many of these home chef brands. Do you see any similarity happening there?
I think the fundamentals of running a brand or a business, whether you're running it for your locality or the country or the globe, actually stay, it, to my mind at least, very consistent. The first thing I think, and this was even struck me as I was going through these entries, is you've got to be clear what your core is. That means what is the reason for people to come to you as a home chef? And that could be any number of things, right? It could be a specialty dish, for example. And I grew up in Bangalore, and Corner House hot chocolate fudge has like a central place in my life. And
Yes.
it's one of those things that you can go anywhere in the world, but to my mind, I don't think there is a better hot chocolate fudge, and that is their calling card. They do lots of other stuff as well, but the calling card remains the same. And I think that becomes quite important for home chefs, which is, it's fantastic to be experimentative and fantastic to have range, but you do need to have something that is your core, a type of cuisine, a particular dish, a style of cooking, any of those kind of things that says to people, okay, if I want this, then I go to this particular home chef. And a couple of them were really interesting. I found one that made different types
No,
of butter, which I
no letting the cat out of the bag. I mean, my cat can walk around, but no other.
I was
Yes.
trying very hard. Suddenly I saw a tail walk past. I was like, okay.
Yes. So that's the only cat, but we won't talk about any of the other sort of uh, judging, because it's still next week. But Bangalore, my God, sorry, I'm sort of going off the radar here, but I love Bangalore and its food. And so you've grown up in Bangalore, Prabha?
I did my college in Bangalore, and through postgraduate MBA in Bangalore as well. So,
Yeah, so I
and
have a
reasonable
Bangalore.
proportion of my working life in Bangalore
Oh, okay. And because of tea, I guess.
because
For
of
some
tea,
reason,
exactly.
Bangalore is home for so many food brands, no? Because there's, your Unilever tea, Kisan originally, I think, was also Bangalore.
Bangalore based.
Then ITC Foods is also based over there. But Bangalore, one very good example of a single-minded vision is MTR. Like, and my understanding is, it's grown so much, and and if you go to the newer franchise, not the franchise, but the outlets, they're very different from the original one, which is that two-storied
Correct.
thing. But when you think of MTR, you think of that rava idli, and you
Right.
think of the bene dosa, and those are things which are there. Then they of course have meals and things like that, and that's also a family-run business. So in fact, I know this lady Sridevi. I think she and her mother are a big part in running it now. And Bangalore has so much exciting food. It's one of the most
No, and they
exciting.
keep so many things consistent, right? In their main restaurant, they still, if I'm not mistaken, I haven't been there for a while, but I'm not mistaken, still serve on those silver thalis and with the cups. And so much of it has
Yeah.
a brand value to it, so to say. So
Yes.
as opposed to just the food. So I think that was one of my thoughts, Kalyana. I had a couple of others. The other one was really, I think as with all brands, actually, packaging matters. And I think in this case as well on food, the visual appeal of the food really important. So if I had one piece of advice and I was allowed to offer only one, my advice would be to invest in photography, because making the
Yes.
food look really enticing, I think you've won half the battle in terms of getting consumers to think that they want it. And it's true of brands that we run. It's true of home chefs, and getting better at that part. I think is really the second thing that struck me as I was looking through those entries, because that quality did vary between the people who did it well versus the people who did it perhaps less well. And maybe there's an opportunity actually for all of us to learn in that space.
And I think that there are different parts of marketing sort of cycle or lever, because like you said, that first of all, the enticing pictures of food draws to sort of place an order, and then there are more parts, right? Like even when the food comes home, like that's a big part of that.
Actually, I
In
have an
fact,
interesting story there. We
yeah,
had
please do,
ordered
please go
food.
ahead.
Yeah, we had ordered food last night from one of the restaurants, and my husband looked at the packaging and goes, "I'm sure that doesn't taste nice." As it turned out, the food was really good, but because it came in rather average packaging, the feeling was that it wasn't either hygienic or it wouldn't taste nice. And it took quite some convincing to get him to try it before that decision was passed. So you're absolutely right. It makes in the full chain, it makes a difference from getting somebody to place the order to getting somebody to see the food as it arrives and think delicious, and then you've won half the battle, right?
And also as going forward, like when the home chefs initially came into their own, which was during the just after the first lockdown last year, then there was no competition. but now restaurants are coming back, five-star hotels are coming back, and they're all delivering home. Right now, I got a menu from one five-star hotel, and then cafes, and they're doing such interesting packaging. So if home chefs are looking at building sustainable businesses, I think you said there's a third thing which you wanted to talk
Yeah.
about. You spoke about packaging and
I,
vision and
I think the third thing is what it's great as a home chef is that it allows you to have a relationship with your consumers. Unlike, some of these larger brands, and there's nothing wrong with large brands. I like
yeah,
them
of course.
personally, but I just think that when you're a home chef and you're catering to a given audience, and a lot of them tend to be repeat consumers because they like what you do, and perhaps a relationship with them, which is a little bit two-way and more dialogue, I think becomes the third thing that really struck me, saying that you have an Instagram page, that's great, but then you must be able to respond to queries and comments, and make things a little bit more about dialogue than a one-way communication street of here's my menu for the week, which is great. But I think it does add a little bit if the person who's eating your food has the opportunity to comment. And of all of the home chefs I've tried over the last little while, some people again are very good at this, the follow up on what did you think, and how could we be better, or what did you love, and what would you like to share. And some are like, okay, I've delivered the order, I'm done.
Yeah, this reminds me of something which we once had a conversation on home chefs in a different scenario, and with Chef Ashish Bhasin and Ranveer Brar. So there was a very interesting point which Ranveer made over there, that home chefs are different from restaurants and hotels. So they should not try to change what they are, and use their and leverage their strengths. So like you said, I mean, big brands, whether it's in FMCG or in hospitality and F&B, have their own strengths. And the fact is that it's a huge market. There's a lot of demand, and home chefs definitely can't meet that. And you do need big brands, big distribution for all of that. But there are certain strengths which a home chef brings in. So one thing which home chefs find a bit intimidating, and most of them are not from the world of marketing or business. Some of them might not have even worked before this, and but are now actually running their families. And I know there are cases like that where, say, the chief wage earner, so to speak, might be laid low because of the economic downturn, and the home chef in the family is running it. So so sometimes when they hear words like branding, distribution, packaging, it just seems very big, and it's fine for a company to do it. So what's your advice that what are the things that a home chef can do to build their brand? You've already spoken of some of that, but from a say some from slightly more like Nidhi from Book Workshop, who couldn't join in today because it's raining in Nashik. She always likes asking these specific questions, that if one was starting off as a home chef, what are the specific things to look out for to build a
So
brand?
I think the first one is, be careful as you choose your name. I think is the first start, because it should be easy for people to understand and easy these days for people to spell.
Yes.
Because if you don't get that right, then you don't even, like, for example, searching for some people on Instagram takes quite some effort, because you've got the spelling slightly off because the word was complicated. And I do think that that's maybe the first and the fundamental thing, that you think slightly long term, and then choose a branding that's a name that's easy, that's memorable, that can be owned by you. And I think those are perhaps the three criteria that I would take to look at in that. The second is your menu. And it just goes back to the fact that it must speak to who you are. And a lot of the home chefs in their bios talked about cooking from the heart and cooking with love, and the fact that these are, family recipes that have been handed down, and, various things that do set apart home chefs from the bigger restaurant brands. And I think there's an opportunity to maybe just channel that into the menu, into the way you name your dishes, into the way you describe your dishes, into the way you photograph your dishes. There were some really evocative things that were done with that. And I think the third part is just think through the kind of consumer that you serve and the target audience and your pricing, just in terms of who's going to buy your food, and therefore make sure that the food, the packaging, the branding kind of fits with that. For example, just as if you're talking about this whole, sustainable, I use
Hmm.
only local produce, I'm organic, and
Yes.
then it comes in mountains of plastic, it just doesn't seem to gel. So maybe, the end-to-end thinking just helps then to say, okay, how will I make sure that my packaging reflects my ethos as well? So those would be my, top of mind thoughts.
Yeah, I think those are very interesting points. And in fact, I'll give two examples here of packaging. So one is Marina Balakrishnan, who runs something called Utupura from Mumbai, and she does Keralite plant-based food, which I think is a new term for vegetarian, but not vegan. So, so her food comes like packaged in environment-friendly packaging, and then with little labeling because it's a different sort of cuisine and what to heat with what and so on. And then there is in Chennai, there's Jayadita Sengupta who's moved there now. So she does Bengali food. And then during Durga Puja last time, she moved into sort of, you know, in a fancy word, terracotta packaging, or back home what we'll call mati bhar and mati glass and all that. But it just gives a nice feel when the food comes in all that. I also want to take you up on that second point which you said about people in their bios writing about cooking from the heart, and I also felt, and probably you might have a thought on that, and you said when you said that it should reflect in the name of the dishes and so on, that people need to go a bit beyond that, because cooking from the heart is sort of what most home chefs will say, and family recipes. It's like a company like yours saying that every safety check is maintained, or it has the best ingredients. I mean, we'd expect that, but then slightly more differentiation is probably required, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that comes then in saying, for example, if you're doing Kashmiri cuisine in Mumbai, maybe it's not as prevalent as Kashmiri cuisine in Kashmir, right? And to your point on the lady doing the Malayali food in Mumbai or the Bong food in Chennai, I think you then find a niche where you cook something that is maybe integral to you, but for the people whom you serve, it's quite different and it's quite unique, and it's not necessarily easily accessible, because even in a Mumbai, I was just thinking as you were talking about the Malayali food, that there aren't actually that many even large restaurants that do good Malayali food, and that could be a fabulous niche, right?
True. I mean, there are a few in Fort, South Bombay, but they were really meant for the Malayali working man, and the lunch home. Similarly in Chembur, and then you have the Dakshins and all that of, but not really home cooking.
Correct. And someone like Dakshin, for example, certainly cannot be, the
It's not
ones.
every day. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. But I'm going to turn up there once a week and have lunch. So
Yes. Yeah. What is the role of, in your opinion, of nostalgia and things like that? Right in the beginning, you spoke about a brand should have a vision and an identity. So, what are the pegs which a home chef can use to create? In fact, as a company and yours, and you've seen the market also that they're moving away from, in the 80s and 90s, it was so much about the product windows, the the wash boosters and the PSPOs and the fuel scrubbers and all of that, to telling a story. So like big brands are realizing this. So how can home chefs, like, which are the elements they can leverage in telling a story?
I think the first one becomes authenticity. And I think that's as critical for large brands as small brands. And the thing is that all of us now are bombarded by so much information. We all have a filter that separates out what we think is crap from what we think is true. And the home chefs have a real opportunity, because it is true, right? Most of them, it is their story of that individual, or that family. I think that's the first absolute thing to leverage. I think the second thing to leverage is provenance, and where your dish comes from, what is the source of what you're cooking, and again, to go back to the Kashmiri or the Malayali, the spices are different.
Yes.
You can buy the store bought thing and replicate it, but it somehow doesn't have the same feel as if you have the right provenance on the dishes. And the third thing, which I must tell you, that is becoming more and more important to me, is this whole idea of health, and the fact that this food is not mass produced, and it's actually made on a small scale, and made usually, I hope, therefore fresher, therefore less oil, less preservatives, less of all of the baddies. I think that becomes a third space that you trust more, that home chefs will be able to do that. And therefore, to the comment on safety and hygiene becoming table stakes, with that table stakes, the fact that you can serve healthy, tasty food, the absolute holy grail of everything food in the world,
Tasty
that
and healthy,
would
yes.
be that would I think that becomes a third thing that home chefs could really leverage.
Yeah, I like what you said because, like I said, I mean, I've been sort of in this since the late 90s and, handling food brands, and the concept notes, whether I was in advertising or in research, would always be taste and health. But what you said, which is redefining both taste and health, the fact that today taste is so much about provenance and where it's coming from, and health is about, like, the freshness. So, so Prabha is a foodie and a vegetarian. And before you think it's oxymoronic, sometimes vegetarians get a bit defensive when coming across someone like me who's Bengali, married to a Parsi, and so on. On record, I must say that this afternoon I had and you'll see exactly what. I'll tell you what I had. I had tur dal, I had long beans, and I had roti, which is very simple. But the long beans ka bhaji was made with coconut, and it was made with East Indian bottle masala. So the East Indians, like are the original sort of settlers of Mumbai, and there's a lady called Hilda who's been making this bottle masala for 40 years, and her daughters gave me a bottle recently with different recipes. So I started with those recipes, which is for prawn and mutton, and now been using them for tenli, for beans and stuff, farash beans. Now the dal which our cook had made, which is tur dal, so there was a bit of that red lasan chutney which the Marathis use. So it had come from a restaurant called Aswad when I'd called for puri bhaji. So I sprinkled that on top. I'll show you the picture. And the roti is from atta is from this place called Chakki Girls. So they do this sort of atta which is on subscription. So very small portions which they send you fresh, you know. And so we tried different ones like jawar, bajra, wheat, and this is something called bansi. So even I was not that familiar with it. It's a wheat called bansi wheat, if I'm not wrong. So it's like gehu. So you can actually make it with a belan, unlike jawar, bajra, but it's got a bite. So when you're growing up, and I would see the rotis which would come from the roadside restaurant sometimes. If our cook was not there, and mom would call it. At that time, we'd look down upon it because you'd want your roti to be patla and stuff like that. But now you're sort of appreciating these textures and the bites and the different ingredients. Which makes it's off track, but I wonder then how are big companies sort of handling this? It just interests me, like this.
I think, I mean, I don't work in the food space currently, but then as I look around as a consumer in the food space, you do see that big companies are also getting into a lot of, I think, very distinct varianting, and particularly the ones that are the newer foods companies, certainly going into spaces that are more interesting, spaces that straddle this whole taste and health area, and they are seeing that they do need variants. I think perhaps gone are the days where you have this one hero variant and 70% of the people
Hero ingredients,
hey, that's
yes.
the one for me. So you are seeing much more spread even from the big companies, which I think is inevitable. I must tell you an anecdote on this. I
Please
have
do.
two kids. One is
Yes.
18 and one is 12. And if you serve rice for 3 meals in a row, they will go, is this the only thing we eat in our house these days? So, and I grew up in a South Indian family eating rice. I imagine every lunch and dinner for every meal, I think, till I was 15 or something, barring the odd occasion. So it's just that the need for variety and the access to variety has changed so much that everybody needs to keep up. And this is where I think home chefs can absolutely find a niche. Like Bansi wheat might not be your answer every meal, but it
No, but
certainly could be an answer for one meal a week.
no, and it's giving that variety. So
Right.
so they also have jawar, they also have bajra, and all of that. So we are trying all of these, and even the gehu, and which brings me
And the
to
model itself predicates on variety, right? That they'll
yes,
send
yes.
you
So they
different
give us small portions, like 500 grams or 250
fantastic
grams, and
idea.
they yeah, and so I want to ask this part on pester power, so to speak. I mean, of course, while your elder one is 18, but I think kids are always pests even when they're in their 40s. So, what is the role of kids in asking for new varieties? Like, is it only the grown-ups who are looking at varieties, or also are kids also going beyond pizza, pasta, burger, which was in our generation perhaps, and looking for Indian options? Or do you think kids are doing that?
Actually, I think the kids are perhaps one of the biggest drivers of this, at least in our house, they certainly are. Firstly, because they're just exposed to so much media. And
Yeah.
secondly, because they have friends and they go to their friends' homes, or at least pre-pandemic, they used to go to
Yes.
their friends' home and they read something there. And then it will be, oh, I have this most amazing things in so-and-so's house. And there's almost an implied, so when are we going to try it? And I think through the pandemic, certainly there's also been an interest in can they help, because they're also finding, avenues of entertainment have been shrunk. And so coming into the kitchen and trying out things is also one more avenue of entertainment for them. And that then adds to more. That usually tends to have chocolate at its heart. But at least with that, there is stuff that's happening that's in and around the chocolate world that they are now
Yeah,
cooking. So I
baking.
think,
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
so that I think that is becoming quite a thing. That and bread is quite a thing.
Sourdough. But one thing which struck me as we were speaking is that perhaps a lot of the home chefs marketing is sort of aimed at the mom and dad or the couples and stuff like that. But maybe there is some need to war. There's some point in sort of aiming at the kids or the college kids and stuff like that as
Yeah,
well.
absolutely. And I think that they're also a lot more savvy. I
Hmm.
mean, I must confess that as I was growing up, I would not have known,
True.
anything from anything. You ate pretty much what was put in front of you. But here they have preferences and they have knowledge as well. So I think it's certainly an empty space, like particularly the teenage years where you're trying to balance various changes that are happening to you, and you want to still look good and you want to eat well and you want it to taste good. I think there's definitely an opportunity there.
And they understand social media. So I mean that's a
Very
great way.
much.
Okay, before I leave you, I'm going to ask you one question, which is sort of pulling back a bit because, like you said, I mean, you're now you're more in the household care segment, right? If I understand right. So, if I remember my terminology right from my research days. So, are there any sort of in post-pandemic, because it's been a year and maybe 3 months now, changes in the way the world is looking at life or India is looking at life, which home chefs should take note of and which you feel home chefs are in a position to take advantage of?
So I think the one obvious one, Kalyan, obviously is hygiene.
Yeah.
And it really, and I cannot stress this enough, that the concern, and I'm sure everybody went through this thing of, washing their vessels and washing, I mean, sorry,
Yes.
their fruit and veg and washing every single packet that came to their house phase. And while we've maybe got a bit overdoing that, the base concern on hygiene has definitely elevated. So I think, like with all big brands, your home chefs first need to reassure on the fact that their processes, the way they make, the way they store, the way they pack, all of that is really hygienic. That's one thing. I think the second thing is that people are a little bit bored. And it's really, it's a little bit of, if you're working from home, particularly, it's a little bit of every day is blurring into the next day
Oh God,
kind of thing.
yes.
And
Yes.
and therefore, a real opportunity, I think, to just provide even an element, a little element of surprise. Right. For example, like you said, you added that red chutney on top of this. It's just a
Last minute,
little
yes.
element of surprise that just
Yeah.
zings up a dish, and I think it's a really nice space. Again, it's not perhaps that hard to do, but it's really interesting. And those would be, I think, the two big things on my mind.
And any tips on how home chefs can communicate their hygiene process? Like, one thing which in our research days we would often tell clients that, you might be taking a lot of steps, but unless the consumer knows of it and feels convinced, then it's sort of like, pointless. So,
Previous job, Kalyan, I used to work in skincare and makeup, and absolutely and utterly fell in love with Instagram. Instagram is a place, I think, where people actually want brands to talk about themselves. Whether they are
mm,
small brands or big brands, you don't feel offended when a brand is on Instagram in the middle of your feed, unlike
yes.
everywhere else where they are an interruption. And I think it's a great place for people actually to curate their offering, because if I like somebody on Instagram, you likely go back to their feed and see all of the stuff that they have done. And it's a really good opportunity, firstly, for it to look nice. And secondly, to talk about all the things that matter to you. and then just keep reinforcing that again and again over a period of time, because you will get more and more consumers and things keep disappearing down lower and lower, and just almost have a repeat again kind of thing. Like the big brands that get built say the same thing again and again consistently over a period of time, and that's how they get built. And I think that's great advice for home chefs as well. And I fundamentally actually think Instagram is a great place to do.
No, it's so reassuring to hear that, because many of the jury members, some like you who are sort of custodian of brands, and some who are at the other side, working on digital and so on. They same thing again and again are all saying this thing about Instagram. So even in the weightage matrix which we've developed in social media, we've given that a very high weightage. So thank you, Prabha. It was lovely speaking to you, and I hope some lovely food makes it to your way, or you discover some great stuff. And home chefs, one of the reason why we wanted to get a corporate jury like this was to tell you that often sometimes, like I know as a freelancer, one has a lot of self doubts that I'm doing this, but is it or I'm just in my little corner, and it's called something imposter syndrome. But well, today you've got Prabha Narasimhan, who's an executive director and with Unilever, so don't get any bigger than this. And she's saying that she's sort of inspired and by home chefs and respects them. I mean, what greater message do you need, or confidence boost? Right, Prabha? Any last words?
Absolutely. No, Kalyan, I wanted to thank you very much for having me. Like I said, this is my first time. I hope that you will invite me again, because it was great fun.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Do take care.
Thank you.
Bye.